Today we're going to be talking about natural selection. We're going to write these notes on page 30 of our interactive biology notebook. So at the top of the notebook, I'm going to go ahead and write natural selection so that I know exactly what this page is about. So before we go into what natural selection is, we have to understand what evolution is. So evolution is the change in population of species over time. So I'm going to write that. Evolution is the change in population of species over time. So the most important thing about this definition is that it is the change of population. It is not the change of an individual. An individual cannot be a representation of the entire population of species. So for evolution to occur, the entire population must be changing over time. So back in the day, we had Charles Darwin explain to us what the idea of natural selection is, but before Darwin came into the story, we had a scientist named Lamarck. And so Lamarck proposed this theory of acquired characteristics. So based on his theory, he thought that organisms can get their traits basically by using it over and over again. So a giraffe can increase the size or the length of its neck purely on the fact that it can stretch its neck over time. And then this idea of acquired characteristics can be passed on to the offspring. Later on, this was proven to be incorrect by an experiment where they had a mouse This mouse had no tail. So this mouse that had no tail was also mated with another mouse with no tail. They mated, and their offspring was a mouse with a tail. So this experiment in particular showed that Lamarck was wrong. So Lamarck didn't take into consideration that you get traits from your DNA. So if you dye your hair blue, your children will not be born with blue hair. It is just something that you temporarily change in the moment. It wasn't until Charles Darwin proposed the idea of natural selection. So Darwin is known to be father of evolution. He did a lot of traveling, and he did a lot of traveling and observed a lot of organisms over time, and he came up with this theory of natural selection, which has been proven to be correct. So what natural selection is when organisms who are best fit for their environment are most likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their genes. So organisms that are best fit. So best fit in our case means that they can survive in the environment that they live in. Are most likely or more likely to survive, reproduce, and then pass on their genes. To offspring. So the most important part of this definition is that organisms are best fit for their environment, are most likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their genes. So every time you see natural selection, you should be thinking about these key words. And if you ever have a question that answers or asks you to answer what natural selection, you must include these phrases and words inside that definition. So what does this actually mean? What are the components of natural selection? There are 4 components, or 4 main components. And so the 4 main components, the first one is variation. So variation is just telling you that there are different types of individuals within that population. So for example, if we have a population of blobs, these blobs can come in different colors. They may have sharp, pointy noses. Some of them may not have any noses, but we know that they all have to eat the same food. So our example is the species of blobs come in different colors and may or may not have pointy noses. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a picture of this. You may need to get some colors as well. So in my blob, I may have a blue blob. I may have a blue blob with a long pointy nose. More blue blobs. I may have purple blobs with pointy noses. May have some with no pointy noses. I may even have orange blobs. But regardless of what those blobs look like, they all share the same food source. So in our example here, the food source will be on the ground. So you have blobs, and you have food. The next thing that you need for natural selection is competition. So competition is basically when two or more individuals fight or compete for the same thing. So in our case, in this example, we have blobs that are competing for food. During a dry year, the food becomes scarce. So blobs fight for food. Or they have to compete for the food. So it looks like I'm running out of room. I'm going to go ahead and get another sheet of paper and then paste this in after I'm done. Alright. So we have already 2 points, which is variation and competition. The third point is survival. So third point here is survival. So the blobs that were able to find food did not die, and the blobs that could not get the food died. And because of this, most of the ones that died did not have pointy noses. So we had blobs with pointy noses, we had blobs without pointy noses, and they were all fighting for a food source. So because this food source was on the ground, the blobs with the pointy noses were able to pierce this food and eat it. The ones that without the pointy noses could not pierce the food and was not able to eat the food. So what ended up happening is over time, the blobs without the pointy noses would die. So when they died, and if we go into our fourth point, if they died, they were not able to reproduce. So the fourth point is that you need to be able to reproduce. And in this example, the blobs with pointy noses reproduced. And therefore passed on genes. So you have you have your blobs that were still different variations. So they were different colors. They met up. They mated. And they had more blobs with pointy noses. So again, natural selection is when organisms who are best fit for their environment are most likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their genes. In our particular examples, we had blobs that had different variations, so they had different colors, they had different shapes, but they were all competing for the same type of food. This food is on the ground, so the blobs with the pointier noses were best fit or had the best advantage of grabbing this food. So because of that, they were able to survive. The blobs that did not have the pointy noses were not able to get their food. Because they were not able to get their food, majority of them died off. And so as the population changed, the blobs with the pointy noses were able to survive, reproduce, and then pass on their genes. So those are the main points of natural selection. We're going to go into more detail and get more practice when we get to class next week. But make sure you have these notes on page 30 of your notebook. And I will see you guys next week.